quiet so fast. I think people are tired, actually. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the home of sustainable agriculture of the Americas. The theme of this panel, Lowering Livestock Emissions, is really a fundamental reason why we're here. About 5 years ago, there were reports that came out saying that we need to reduce our consumption of meat because of its impact on the environment. And there's a lot of stories that continue to this day about the negative impacts of meat and of livestock in the world without really looking at the other side of the equation. The fact that animals take care of the land, we benefit from the nutrition that we receive from animal agriculture. They essentially recycle pasture, which is 70% of agricultural land that can't be used for anything else. So there are important aspects to livestock, and the fact is that we can reduce livestock emissions, and we're doing it. And so with that, I'm delighted to welcome Saniro Costo to moderate this panel, and we hope that you all learn a lot and enjoy the panel. Thank you very much, Saniro.
Thank you very much. Hi again. Hope everybody's having a good time here at COP. So another session on lowering livestock emissions, innovations in technologies, policies, and finance. And obviously we know that's a very important topic, considering that today food systems contribute to about 30% of global emissions. In this context, livestock production for meat and milk alone accounts for about 60% of total food system emissions. Close to 70% of these food system emissions come from land use change and farming activities. But although these livestock value chains are the most intensive ones across other food systems, they also have the largest mitigation potential. For example, improving production practices with existing technologies could reduce emissions by 40 to 70% compared to average values. However, this mitigation potential will only be unleashed with large-scale coordinated development and deployment of innovations in technologies, policies, and finance. These advancements are critical to paving the way for a more sustainable and climate-aligned livestock practices, offering hope for a greener future. And again, this only can be achieved through collaborations between scientists, finance, funders, and farmers. So to discuss this topic today, we brought to you representatives of those sectors to grant us with their views and opinions on innovations that could, again, unleash all this mitigation potential in food systems. So we have here Josefa Masanja from Africa Youth Initiative. Thanks for being here with us. Luis Fernando Laranja da Fonseca, founder of No Carbon Milk, Brazil. Thanks. Frank Mitloner, Clear Center, University of California, Davis. Thanks, Frank. Ellison Thompson, Greener Cattle Initiative, Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. Thanks for being here with us. And Helen Meirovich, IDB Invest, Director of Climate Change. Thanks again. So this panel will be roughly 4 parts, followed by Q&A, in which I encourage you to participate. And in the first part, we would like to hear a bit from the farmers' role and perspective for this topic. So we're starting off with Joseph. Joseph, could you please tell us about the importance of livestock in the context of Africa, and why livestock are important, or livestock food systems are important for nutrition, economic growth, especially for smallholders?
Thank you so much for the invitation. As today in our country we mark the celebration of 62 years independence of our country, I'm so glad to stand together with my fellow panelists today. So back to the contribution of livestock sector in the context of African. Livestock sector play a vital role in different areas. One among those areas, number one, is nutrition importance. Livestock sector has been serving as a very significant source of high quality protein in many African communities and other essential nutrients. We have seen in many pastoral communities, people use this animal product like meat, milk, and eggs as crucial component of diet every day. And we have seen also the difference between a sedentary agricultural community and pastoral communities. For example, in Tanzania, we have the Southern Highland Zone, which serve as food basket in our country. They are part of sedentary agricultural community. Because they don't have this good source of animal protein, we have been encountering around 40% malnutrition problem in these communities. So you can see how it is important to have this livestock product in terms of nutrition importance. But the second thing on the issue of economic significance, livestock sector serve as source of livelihood in many millions of African people. People get employed in this sector, they get employment, but also at the national level, livestock sector to contribute around 10% GDP. We have also seen a lot of foreign currency coming out from livestock product. We sell a lot of commodities around the global markets, including this dairy product and etc. But also they serve as a form of insurance in economic shocks, because we have seen, for example, the community of Maasai across East Africa. They use livestock as part of saving, but also they use this livestock, for example, cattle, as part of insurance during economic shocks. We have also social and cultural values from this livestock sector. We have seen a very significant cultural issues on livestock. People use livestock in ceremony in Africa. They use also in rituals. They use also in different social groups. As we are gathered, we use livestock to be part of our, tremendous kind of sharing. We share meats, we share milk, we share different products from livestock as pastoral community. So it plays a very vital, significant importance. But back to some challenges in terms of emission. Livestock sector contribute a lot of emissions, especially in Africa. Of course, ruminant animals like cattle, they produce green emission, especially methane, from enteric fermentation process coming out from digestion process. And we are training this community to manage this waste product from livestock, especially manure. We are designing lock technology to convert this manure into gas. We call it biogas. And this gas is utilized at household level. We use it for cooking, but also for those community with a super economy, they convert into electricity. So they use it in different activities. We try our level best to mitigate the issue of emission in this community. But there is a very huge problem in terms of balancing the economic importance of livestock, but also the environmental implication of livestock rearing in the community. It is very difficult. That's where the problem comes in. We try our best, as I said, But we work together with different partners, including International Livestock Research Institute, to provide various solutions. One of the solutions that we are promoting now across East Africa is the use of improved foliage, but also feeds resources, which is very best, especially feed supplements. We are encouraging this pastoral community to use feed supplement like sunflower seed cake, one of the best source of protein. But also we have cotton seed cake, which is also providing protein to the animal. So we do encouragement to reduce utilization of poor hay in feeding the animal in East Africa. But also we encourage the government. For example, in Tanzania, we are working so close with Tanzania Livestock Research Institute to make sure that they produce improved breeds, which is actually helping us to mitigate the issue of emission. So all those kind of initiatives we are implementing to make sure that we mitigate the issue of emission in the livestock sector. Thank you so much.
Very, very interesting. Thank you so much. Now shifting to another global region, Latin America. So Luis, could you please give us the exactly context for Latin America, for what is the importance of livestock for economic growth and nutrition? And also if you could share some success stories and challenges to implement mitigation interventions at ground level.
Yeah, thank you, Siniru. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the organization, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share the floor with these outstanding speakers. And it will be a pleasure to share some information about our experience in Brazil in the livestock sector. Well, livestock sector is a crucial sector in terms of economy and in terms of social aspect in Brazil. It generates a lot of jobs. I can give you an idea about how much jobs we have potential of generation potential. For example, in the dairy sector, we have almost 1 million dairy farmers in Brazil. So it's a huge sector in terms of social impact. In terms of land use, it's very representative. We have more than 180 million hectares of pastures dedicated to livestock in Brazil. In the beef sector, we have around 230 million heads of animals, beef cattle. So it's a huge sector that generates a lot of jobs, a lot of revenues. And of course, with this magnitude, we could see the livestock sector as a threat or as an opportunity in terms of climate change. And I think that in terms of opportunity, we have a huge space to explore. And that's what we have seen in Brazil in some initiatives, and I can share with you at least 2 initiatives where we are directly involved. A few years ago, we decided to create the first carbon neutral dairy operation in Brazil. And finally, 2 years ago, we launched the first carbon neutral milk brand in Brazil. So our intention was to show that it's possible to produce high quality protein without impacting the climate. And so this brand that's called the No Carbon Milk, and we use this brand exactly to provoke a debate in the society. I mean, we use no carbon in the name of our brand just to get attention from the consumer about this topic. And so we could do that by reducing the emission as much as we can in the production system, and the residue of the carbon emission that we could not put in zero, we compensate by planting native trees on farm. So that's the strategy we use to create the first carbon neutral milk production operation system in Brazil. And I can tell you that based on the measurements that we are doing in our operation, we can show that it's possible to produce a low carbon milk. Just to give you some numbers based on data we collect, we are producing a milk with a carbon print around 1.5 kilos of CO2 equivalent per liter of milk. And in this calculation, we are not considering yet the methane emission that we have by starting using a feed additive like Bovaer. That's one of the first approved feed additive to reduce methane in the world. So we are using Bovaer in the last 6 months, and we haven't included in our equation the reduction of Bovaer. So for sure, we are producing a milk with a carbon footprint around 1 kilo of CO2 equivalent per liter of milk, and we are sure that we can reduce more yet, especially if we consider the potential carbon sequestration in the soil. So what we are saying is that yes, it's possible. By the other side, we have another initiative that's in the beef sector, where we are developing a new methodology of carbon credit generation, considering the improvement in the productivity of beef cattle. This new methodology is in the final approval process by the Vera, and we understand that by doing that, we can use the carbon credit market to improve, to increase, to accelerate the transformation of the beef sector towards a more productive system. So what I'm saying in summary is that yes, it's possible to produce a high quality protein with a low carbon footprint.
Thank you so much, Luis. And change now to technological innovations. And Frank, could you please comment on the latest technological innovations and research aimed at reducing livestock emissions, especially on methane reduction technologies, please?
Yes, well, thank you for the question. So first of all, throughout the world, there are different approaches, and different approaches needed. In many developing countries, approaches are different from, let's say, developed countries, and so far that oftentimes productivity is much lower, and by improving productivity, we can relatively shrink herd sizes, and that has a far-reaching impact on the environmental footprint in these countries. So better productivity, better animal health, better nutrition, better reproduction are the main levers in many developing countries. In many developed countries, the focus is really on two main factors. The one is enteric emissions, and that's the front-end emissions. That's what's belched out of those animals' mouths. And that is the lion's share of methane emissions from the livestock sector, particularly the ruminant livestock sector. The second one is animal manure. With respect to enteric emissions, there are efforts underway of studying numerous feed additives. And there are two main groups. The one is rumen modifiers. These are additives that change the microbial composition in the rumen, from those that do produce methane to those that don't produce methane. And the second main group of these feed additives are methane inhibitors, and they actually change the enzymatic production of methane. While the first group is moderately effective, the second group seems to be quite effective indeed, with reductions possible of around 30–40%. The limitation around these additives is that in countries like the United States, they are not approved yet for use. In other places like Brazil, like the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, they are approved and can be used. So feed additives are certainly one main approach. A second main approach is breeding, animal breeding. On the dairy side, we're now in a situation where genomic tests have been developed to find out whether a cow is a high or low producing cow, methane producing cow. And once you know which ones your low methane producing cows are, you can then use those for breeding. And that's a permanent reduction. That's a second very important approach. A third one developed in New Zealand is a vaccination approach, vaccinating against methane. Now, that is not ready for prime time yet, but I think there's promise in that. Soil carbon sequestration is a major area of debate. Some say it generates a lot of potential a great sink, and others saying not so much. I think the jury is still out as to how significant it really is. And then the other approach, and that's my last point, is the one around animal manure. Here, particularly on dairies, the liquid manure storage is the main source of emissions. There are now places like California where hundreds of these large dairy lagoons are capped. The biogas that's generated therein is captured and converted into fuels. And these so-called renewable natural gas fuels that are generated are then used to power large semi-trucks, buses, and so on. And that's a double whammy of dairy emission reductions plus transportation emission reductions. And so my last point, a state like California, where methane is a big deal, where we need to reduce 40% of that gas, has already achieved 30% of its methane reduction goals. And that is done by the state working with and not against farmers. An approach of voluntary incentive-based mechanisms where farmers are financially incentivized to reduce emissions.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And Alison, could you please tell us how FR
Yes.
is...
First of all, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Please.
No, Colleen, Allison got pulled into a panel, but I promise, I'm from the Communications and Legislative Affairs side, but I promise I can still represent the view.
Okay, that's fine. Fair enough. Sorry.
I'm no Allison, but I'm good.
Okay, that's good. Thanks for reminding me about it. But could you please tell us a bit on the research partnership through the Greener Cattle Initiative and how to extend these learnings to farmers of all scales and regions?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who aren't familiar with us, we're the Foundation for Food and Agriculture, or FAR. We were created in the 2014 Farm Bill with the mandate to build collaborative public-private partnerships that fund bold food and agriculture research. So basically what that means is every dollar of public funding that we receive, we're required to match it with private sector funding. So we're maximizing taxpayer investment and accelerating agriculture research in this way. So primarily we fund research through 4 different mechanisms. We have competitive proposals like requests for applications, direct funds, prizes, and then our consortium model. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about today. So consortiums are really great because they bring together stakeholders from in the pre-competitive space to address shared challenges, like, for example, enteric methane mitigation. Which is part of the cattle's natural digestive process, which is a big greenhouse gas emitter that contributes to climate change. So FAR, with the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, formed the Greener Cattle Initiative. This is a consortium comprised of 11 participants from food and agriculture industry, commodity groups, and NGOs. So we have great representation across the board. These 11 partners are responsible for helping to form the scientific scope, the consortium strategy, and then they also review and approve research. So from the research side, we just launched our first request for proposals. It was last spring, and this year we awarded 3 grants. That was really exciting because we exceeded funding expectations by 45%. So we're going to be able to fund more research in the future. Actually, in 2024, we're expecting another call for a request for proposals, which is really exciting. And 2 out of the 3 of those grants that we just funded received additional matching funding. So it just really goes to show that the Greener Cattle Initiative is able to leverage these matching funds, that we're on the right track, and that we can really catalyze a lot of action in this area. So that's really exciting. For the farmer piece of it, a lot of this, I've heard this thread throughout the past few days. I'm sure you have too if you've been to some site events, but I think what's really exciting is farmer representation is being mentioned more, and the fact that farmers need to be co-creating this research, that we can't just say, hey, this is the research that we're funding without realizing the challenges and opportunities that exist. So through research funded through the Greener Cattle Initiative, we're providing more options to farmers for enteric methane mitigation so that they can figure out exactly what works on their farm, because as you know, no two farms, no two ranches are alike. So it's really giving a host of options. We're relying on the research awardees to kind of disseminate this knowledge so that farmers and ranchers can decide which works best with their individual farm.
Thanks for that. But and then the question is how to finance all this transition, right? And now we would like to hear from Helen that given this science and farmers context, could you please provide us a few words on funding opportunities and innovative financial models to overcome barriers and implement mitigation projects?
Okay, thank you. I was thinking that probably many people listening to all these interventions were like, oh, this is great, but how can I finance that? So now I understood why I'm in this panel. So just to explain what the financial sector is doing, the MDBs, the one that I represent, IDB Invest, the private sector arm of the Inter-American Development Bank, and also private banks. The conversation has evolved tremendously, and probably you have seen in the last few days a lot of commitments by a lot of financial institutions saying they have a target of X amount of their financing going to climate change mitigation and adaptation. And so all of us have a target, and so we're looking for these types of investments. We are looking for investments that are dealing with climate change mitigation or adaptation. When we come down to the livestock sector specifically, then the conversation is about how to prove that we are reducing emissions. How do we showcase that this money that I'm giving as a climate finance will achieve the goal that I'm supposed to achieve? And so part of the conversations and the examples that you were giving were very interesting because that's exactly what we match with the financial structure that we do, the financial innovation that we may do with a client, with a private sector client, to achieve the emissions reductions that they want to achieve. So let's talk about financial products. So one of them that you have heard quite a lot is our green bonds. Green bonds are basically a bond, the issuance of a bond that is going to be used for a specific use of proceeds. So let's say in the examples that you were talking before, you need, I don't know, $12 million. I don't know how much it costs to do a specific project in Brazil, but if you have a use of proceeds that is specific for or the technology of using in the lagoons that you said, you estimate how much it costs to put the machinery that you need to produce the energy out of the methane, and then we finance that. And you can issue green bonds, and there are a lot of institutional investors out there that are interested in buying and purchasing those green bonds. But then the evolution in the capital markets have evolved to say, well, sometimes companies have targets themselves. And it's not only one action that they want to do, but they want to do several actions across their farm. So can we do that? Well, yes, you can, and that's why we have sustainability-linked bonds or sustainability-linked loans, which basically you say, you as a company want to reduce, I don't know, 30%, and probably California has done this for the state. You want to reduce 40% of the methane? Okay, so that's the KPI that you have, and we will reduce the interest rate of that loan, or we will change the coupon of that bond if you achieve that KPI, which makes it very interesting because you know that the financiers of that company or in Treasury in California state will be interested in getting the technical people achieve the goals because that will be mean savings, right? But in addition to that, you have to define exactly the KPI, and you have to understand the taxonomy of what kind of things can be included in that. And then you enter into a conversation that you need science to be informing those KPIs. Otherwise, we can fall into greenwashing and not achieving the results that we want. So the conversation of specific targets is really important. And we generally use internally blended finance, which is funds that we have that are concessional resources to be able to incentivize companies to achieve those KPIs that have been set. And of course, we work with advisory service, so we work with technical assistance, providing technical assistance to companies to achieve, because maybe they want to have a plan, they want to have a KPI, but they don't know how to do the plan. And so we provide that. One important point that I thought it was very interesting that you said, no, not all farmers are the same. Sometimes we have to either work with anchor companies that buy from the farmers. And so we work with the anchor company for them to then incentivize farmers to make the change. Or we can work with banks that give smaller loans to farmers to produce the change. So there are many different structures, but all come down to the incentives that the financial sector as a whole has realized that they have a huge role to play in the climate change agenda.
Thank you so much, Hirin. Now, let's talk about a bit on the collaboration to accelerate the implementation of mitigation interventions. So, Frank, could you please comment on how to reconcile increased productivities with lower overall emissions, as we know that increased productivity is usually associated with higher use of farming inputs that can eventually increase emissions at a farm level?
Yeah. So the best example I can give you, a couple of months ago, I traveled to a country, and the average dairy production per cow per year was per cow per day was 5 liters. 5 liters per cow per day. In California, where I live, it's 45 liters per cow per day. The one cow in California produces more emissions than the one cow in this other country. But she produces 9 times more milk. And therefore, she replaces a much larger group of animals in the second country. So if you now compare the yield on the one versus the yield on the other, then you will quickly find that higher producing animals will overall lead to a lower total emission profile. Simply because you can shrink herd sizes by having more productive animals. Yeah. And this is where we have seen things going. For example, in the United States, we used to have 25 million dairy cows back in 1950. 25 million. Today we have 9 million dairy cows, so much fewer, but this much smaller herd today produces 60% more milk. So the carbon footprint of a gallon or a liter of milk has shrunk by 2/3. And those developments are possible everywhere. That's not to say we want to replicate what production in the US is in the rest of the world, but under any kind of conditions, you can do a better job. In some cases, in some places, it might be called sustainable intensification, where you have relatively extensive systems, but you now use tools to do more with less. And I think that's where it's going. We will continue to use technology in developed countries. We will continue to use better breeding, better feeding, better genetics, as well as what did I say? Feeding, breeding, genetics. Those are the main levers, I would say.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that. That's very aligned with Josephi and Luis' comments on Brazil and Africa, respectively. And then, Colin, on the collaboration between scientists, funders, the financial sector, and farmers to accelerate the emission reduction efforts. Can you please tell us a bit about this collaboration, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you a lot about collaboration, but I'm going to try to keep it brief, just because collaboration is such an essential part of what we do at FAR. We're responsible for convening stakeholders and kind of figuring out what's going on in this space, what are the knowledge gaps. So something that we always think about through this frame of being a funder is making sure that research doesn't just sit on a shelf. So we want to make sure that we're funding research that's actionable, that will actually have impact, that farmers actually need, and that can be implemented. So we need to make sure that it's scalable and commercially feasible in order to ensure that this is actually having the impact that we're intending it to. So we look for research that, well, first of all, yeah, we look for research that has real world impact, but then the second piece of that is, like I said, for Greener Cattle Initiative, the steering committee is responsible for reviewing and approving these projects. And I think one really cool thing about Greener Cattle Initiative is that the steering committee members, the 11 companies and organizations who comprise that, represent basically the whole beef and dairy sector, the value chain. So that's really cool. We have producers in animal health, genetic, feed and nutrition companies. So it's really cool to get their perspective and see, because they have a lot of touch points with their stakeholder communities, just to make sure that we're keeping a pulse on things and that the research that we fund has the intended impact. So to answer your question, I think that collaboration is kind of sown throughout this entire process. We want to make sure as much as we can that we're co-creating with farmers and that they have a seat at the table. That's another thread that I've seen throughout the past few days at the conference, but just making sure that's not a talking point and something that's being said, but actually exercised after this conference and when we're funding research, and making sure that there's an open dialogue and that researchers are communicating with farmers and vice versa, and that funders are looking for those connections.
That's perfect. Thanks, Colin. And going back to the African perspective on this topic, Josefa, could you please tell us a bit on the importance of knowledge sharing, capacity building, and the role of public-private partnerships to foster this transition to lower beef cattle and livestock production systems?
Thank you so much. Knowledge sharing is very important, especially for smallholder farmers. We really want to see these smallholder farmers having this experience of applying these mitigation strategies, including the issue of reducing this emission in their different activities. It is really important to see these three groups working together: smallholder farmers, private sector, and government policymakers who actually coordinate these all activities. So we have been actually fueling more discussion together as private sector with smallholder farmers group and government to see how we can bring nexus relationship between these three groups. And we have realized the results in terms of relationship. Because I remember last time we have actually facing the same challenge in terms of parasitic infection, parasitic diseases. So we brought it together as this private sector who are working in the same field, together with governments. Then we discussed it together. We come up with a very good promising project of construction of this deep wash across the district in the country. So it was a very tremendous job. So if we can bring these initiatives of working together in a very good therapeutic relationship, it is very tremendous for us to mitigate this scenario.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Josefa. And back to Luis. Luis, given your long track record in this field, in your opinion, what are the key changes or new models that the financial sector could explore to better support the transition to low emissions production systems?
Thanks, Niro. Yes, actually, I think we should look for innovative financial mechanism to support these new models, because traditional financial institutions always are a little bit scared about financing innovative models. Like as I said, we launched the first carbon neutral milk brand in Brazil, so nobody knows exactly what could be the impact in the market of a new concept like that. So we must look for innovation in the financial mechanism, and of course at the end we must find good interest rate to support our business, payment period, and we must address the guarantee. So there's a lot of things that are not easy to make the match with the entrepreneurs, between the entrepreneurs and the financial institution. But recently we have been using some innovative models like blended finance structures. So we are capturing some support from usually philanthropists that now are using the like capital market or innovative financial structure to make blended finance products. So based on this blended finance structure, the regular banks have a reduced risk in the operation and some kind of guarantee, and so it make viable for some farmers to take this money in order to innovate. So this is a kind of thing that we are finding, and it's working okay. And the second thing that we believe that could be an opportunity is the carbon market. Maybe there are opportunities in the carbon market to finance this innovation in the production models.
Oh, thanks. That's perfect, Luis. And back to Helen. In Helen, what types of partnerships does IDB Invest seek to form in order to drive the implementation of sustainable livestock practices?
I think that the point that financial innovation will need data is really relevant. So we need to be able to partner with platform providers of data to see and to kind of to test where the emission reductions are, or the adaptation, or the forest conservation that we're trying to do, right? So partnering with companies that are doing platform and generating from the bottom up or the top down from satellite images is really relevant for us. But I think we are also trying to seek a cooperation across the buyer supply chain. Yeah, across the supply chain, if we produce and we test a model, knowing that there is a supply, a purchaser basically, that the Walmarts or big companies that are purchasing this type of products, and knowing that we can guarantee that there were no deforestation, that we are reducing methane, etc. I think that's very important to be able to issue guarantees with blended finance resources that we have. But having those partnerships with the suppliers, with the ones that are on the other side, with the big companies, is really important. But also with scientific centers like the ones that are here, or funders, because we want to know what kind of models we should put money to test. At IDB Group, we have IDB Lab that has resources to actually test these kind of models in Latin America, right? What I see and what we see is that many times IDB Lab will invest the initial entrepreneur, will invest in the initial ecosystem, and then we as IDB Lab invest that. We as IDB Invest, we can only, let's say, fund a Series C. So there is what everybody calls the valley of death of the entrepreneurs, right? And so that's where philanthropy and the big funds are important to test and to invest to make that entrepreneur or first startup grow to the level of bigger banks. So I think there are different partnerships, and trying to see the whole ecosystems of the finance process, right? It's also a supply chain of finance to get the idea, the initial idea that you get, to the financing.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you so much for that. Now it's time to open up for a Q&A. Does anybody have a question to any of the panelists?
Cool. Hi, Julia from 9.Lowering Livestock Australia. Frank, you mentioned an incentive program in California. I'm wondering if you could just dive into the actual detail of that, and also, I guess, a question for anyone else. Helen, perhaps a real example of how that green financial incentive has played out. What is the incentive?
Yeah, so we have a law called SB 1383, which mandates 40% reduction of methane. And the state decided, the legislature decided to achieve the 40%, not by using the cane approach of rules, regulations, fines, or taxes, but to use the carrot approach of financially incentivizing methane reductions. And the way they did this is we have a cap and trade system, or cap and trade program in California, which generates income because people who cannot reduce emissions have to pay into this account, and those entities that can reduce emissions are then paid out of that account. So if you reduce emissions, for example, like our dairies who cap the lagoons, cap the biogas, convert the biogas, and with it the methane contained therein, into transportation fuels, then these farmers receive a carbon credit called low carbon fuel standard credit. and that low carbon fuel standard credit can amount to significant heights. 2 years ago, the low carbon fuel standard credits that farmers got for selling the biogas making it into transportation fuels per cow amounted to $2,000 per year. If you now consider that the average farmer makes $4,000 per cow for the sales of milk, then that is a sizable chunk. Now it's no longer at 2,000 now, it has decreased, but it's still a sizable chunk. It's guaranteed for 10 years, and that has led to a new gold rush in the state of California. We used to have 100 digesters a year ago, now we have 250. And in 5 years, half of our cows will produce biogas that will produce transportation fuels, either renewable natural gas or green hydrogen or ammonia, something that can be converted out of that.
Perfect. Thanks, Frank. Anybody else? You.
I have a question, and this is for you, Luis. Just curious, are you seeing in Brazil the benefits from consumers who want to buy carbon neutral milk? I mean, what does that give you a boost, and what kind of competitive advantage does that give you? Can your livestock producers earn more money? Can you describe more what you're seeing from Brazil?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I could spend an hour talking about that because we have a lot of research in the last 2 years about the consumer perspective of low carbon product. But to have a short answer, the answer is yes. There are a strong interest by the consumers, but at the end, the intention to pay a premium is low. So it seems contradictory, but it's not. I mean, if you have two products in the shelves with the same product, and one is low carbon, and other is regular, there is absolutely no doubt that the option of the consumer will be for the no carbon or the low carbon product. So the premium that I think that is possible for example, a no carbon or a carbon neutral product in the dairy sector could be 5 to 10%, no more than that. But you know what's more interesting is that there's a lot of confusion in the consumers group about a carbon neutral product. But even with this confusion, the consumer is still interested in something that is new. It's not exactly, the consumers, they don't know exactly what a carbon neutral product is, but they want that kind of product. You know, it's a little bit crazy. You know, another very interesting thing that we realized by the research we did is that there is a kind of splitting the, how can I say, generation groups. So we have 3 certifications in our products: organic, carbon neutral, and animal welfare. And you know what we realize is that old guys like me, 50 and plus, that group prefers organic. That's the main interest is organic. The middle, the guys between 30 and 40, they are interested in carbon carbon neutral. And the young are interested in animal welfare. It's amazing. And when we split by gender, if you put the group of very young and female, 90% would choose animal welfare as the first choice. It's amazing.
Are your prices competitive with other milk?
Yes. We have in some of products, in the more added value products like cheese, we have the same price. In the regular pasteurized milk, our price is 10 to 15% higher than the regular one.
That's a great example of insetting, right? So nobody knows what is actually happening at the farm level, but actually they are reducing emissions and aggregating in the product. That's very interesting. Anybody else? We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Okay.
Hi, I'm Sigalit from IDB Invest, and my question is for Frank. So I have two questions. One of them is regarding the methods that you suggested for reducing methane. What are the ethical implications, particularly because as institutions that are accountable for our reputation, we would like to know what those implications are. And the second is, what technologies are you using to monitor methane throughout the supply chain, or if it's just the monitoring of the last seller? Thank you.
So when you say ethical, are you referring to, so ethical considerations don't exist around the manure so much, because if you cover that lagoon and you capture the gas and you make transportation fuels, there's nothing ethical that is to be considered. Maybe feed additives, are you referring to those? So I don't see any impacts of feed additives on, let's say, animal welfare, animal health. I have not seen it. I've studied several dozen of those. I also don't see major impacts on performance, that they produce more or less. But what they normally do is they address that issue of methane. In a few cases, I've seen some unintended consequences, where something unintended happens, and that's not promoted yet by the companies producing it, but sooner or later that will come out. But overall, I don't see ethical considerations. The second point you had, I'm sorry? So technologies to monitor methane. So on the enteric side, so meaning the front end emissions of cattle, that's something that we can assess under research conditions, where we can put animals into a head chamber or into an environmental chamber, or we can use a so-called green feed where the animals voluntarily stick their head in, and they get rewarded by doing this, by receiving some alfalfa kibbles, okay? And while they're doing it, they are being measured for methane. Under real-world farming conditions, monitoring of methane is pretty much not possible. But let's say you're feeding, as a farmer, additive X. And you want to know, what does that do to my emissions? How much reduction do I get? Then I think the only practical way is that you look at the literature values for reductions of that additive X, and then you do the math. How much of that additive X was fed by this farmer to his or her cows, and then you can do the math. But real-world measurements on the farm will not likely be possible. But one more word on the manure emissions. The manure emissions can be quantified very well, because when you cover, for example, a lagoon, then you get paid for by how much of that gas you produce. So it's being metered. So you know exactly how much methane you produce and you convert into something else. So that's being metered. And it's easy to validate and verify. You're welcome.
Question? Please go ahead.
So, hi, my name is Catherine from Tanzania, and I have a question for Josephat. So, in Africa, we have so many pastoral communities, local communities without the technology, and they don't know about the livestock emissions, like the green emissions. So, I wanted to ask, how do we go to them? How do we let them know about the green emissions, and what technology can they use to lower their emissions, right?
Thank you so much. I think I said about partnership and collaboration. It is very important for we private sector to collaborate together with government to capacitate these smallholder farmers to know the real exactly what is happening once they are rearing their cattle in the area, the emission which is coming out from livestock. So capacity building is one. But also, second thing is the issue of creating a neighboring environment for them to mitigate the emission is very important. Providing them resources, providing them technology, access, providing them incentive, as others said, for them to be able to apply this mitigation and adapt this strategy that we propose for them to apply this mitigation strategy. This is very significant. And we have tried in most of our areas, and we have realized few results by using these few incentives that we get from our partners. That is very important.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Josefa. Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm Brian Lindsay from Global Dairy Platform. Just coming back to your question earlier on products that we're feeding to animals. The crazy thing is at the moment there is technology out there that we can feed to reduce enteric fermentation, but what is not out there is how to incorporate that into your carbon footprinting calculation. So a number of dairy companies that I'm working with at the moment have clubbed together and they're developing the algorithm and the protocol that allow you to do that. And part of that is because there's lots of dairy companies being approached by organisations with lots of foo-foo dust saying this is wonderful stuff. We're helping the dairy companies ask the right questions, coming back to your point. Is it safe for the animal? Does it have any impact on product? Is it safe for the environment? Is it licensed for use in your jurisdiction? And what research sits behind that product that you're going to feed your animals? And that enables you to then build a risk-based approach to how much mitigation you can actually incorporate into your life cycle assessment. So the research behind it in the environment, the feeding system, the farming system, we have a diverse farming system around the world. Has that product been tested in that environment? And that enables you to responsibly report emissions mitigation. Dairy companies are super scared at the moment of being accused of greenwash, and so they want to do this responsibly. So we're working on this with an Australian research consortium at the moment, and we are hoping to go to public consultation early next year on this methodology or protocol, and to make sure we get lots of feedback, get lots of opportunity to share it widely and make sure we build a robust approach.
Very
Just thought I'd share that.
Thanks for your insights. Sounds really promising. Let's take the very last question here, please.
Sorry, I just arrived. Perhaps you was talking about this before. It is possible obtain a neutral or positive carbon system in livestock production on grassland. What is your opinion?
So if you want to become climate neutral, the key is to reduce methane, because methane reductions...
The balance between capture of grassland and emission to the cows.
Yeah. So soil carbon sequestration will not offset the net emissions coming off an animal under any conditions, in my opinion. But you can become climate neutral by reducing methane by large extents, by 30, 40%, well, even 20% can get you to be climate neutral. But I do not think that under any conditions soil carbon sequestration will offset enteric emissions and manure emissions.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think that's the end. Our time is up. I would like to thank all the panelists. Thank you very much. I would like also to thank the audience, and I wish you all a good last days at COP. Bye-bye.